Welcome back to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. The rain fell like tears from a wounded sky the day they buried William Caldwell. James stood apart from the other mourners beneath the ancient oak tree, his hand resting on Ranger's rain-soaked head. The German shepherd sat perfectly still beside him, as he'd been trained to do in the mountains of Afghanistan, watching everything with those amber eyes that seemed to see more than any dog should. James didn't belong here among the dark suits and expensive umbrellas. He could feel their stares, could hear the whispered judgments, the black sheep, the damaged one, the nephew who came back from the war different, broken in ways they couldn't see, but somehow always knew to avoid at family gatherings. Only Uncle Will had understood. Only Uncle Will had sat with him in silence on the porch of the old farmhouse, asking nothing, expecting nothing, just being present, while James learned to breathe again without seeing the faces of the men he'd lost. Now Uncle Will was gone too. The lawyer, Henry Morrison, a thin man in his 70s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, approached James as the crowd dispersed toward their luxury cars. He'd been Uncle Will's attorney for 30 years, and James remembered him from childhood visits, always patient, always steady. "James," Henry said quietly, extending a weathered hand. "William wanted me to give you this personally." In his palm lay an old brass key, tarnished with age, but clearly cared for. Attached to it was a small tag with an address written in Uncle Will's careful handwriting, Bitter Peak, Montana. Before James could speak, a sharp laugh cut through the drizzle. "Is that it?" Robert Caldwell, James's cousin, stood with his sister Patricia under a designer umbrella, both dressed in black that cost more than James's truck. The great inheritance? A key to that falling-down shack in the middle of nowhere? Patricia's smile was cruel and perfectly lipsticked. Poor James. Uncle Will really did lose his mind at the end, didn't he? Leaving the family estate to charity and giving you, she gestured dismissively at the key, whatever that unlocks, probably a shed full of junk. Robert stepped closer, his cologne overwhelming in the damp air. "You know, cousin, if you want to sign over whatever it is, I'm sure we could work something out. Save you the trip to Montana. What could possibly be out there worth anything?" James felt Ranger tense beside him, a low rumble building in the dog's chest. He placed a calming hand on his partner's shoulder. Ranger had protected him through 3 tours. The dog knew threats, could sense them before they materialized. "I think I'll see for myself," James said quietly. Henry Morrison's eyes flickered with something that might have been approval. "William was very specific in his instructions, James. He wanted you to see the property alone. He said you'd understand when you got there." Patricia laughed again, turning away. "Enjoy your inheritance, James. Try not to get lost in the wilderness, though I suppose that dog of yours might be useful for something after all." As they walked away, James heard Robert mutter to his sister, "The land's worthless. Heritage zoning, protected status. Can't develop it. The old man probably senile." But there was something in Robert's voice, something too calculated, too knowing, that made James's instincts sharpen. The same instincts that kept him alive when everything went wrong in the Kandahar Valley. 3 days later, James's truck climbed the winding dirt road into the Montana wilderness. Beside him, Ranger sat alert in the passenger seat, nose pressed to the window, reading the wind the way he'd been trained to read mountain passages for hidden dangers. The trees grew thicker as they climbed, pine and aspen creating cathedral columns in the fading afternoon light. James's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Wide open spaces still made him nervous. Too many places for threats to hide, too many angles of approach. Just a cabin, James told himself, just a piece of property. But his heart knew better. Uncle Will never did anything without reason. The road ended in a small clearing, and there it stood, a cabin that looked like it had grown from the mountain itself. Weathered logs, a stone chimney, windows that reflected the forest like dark mirrors. It should have looked abandoned, forgotten, but it didn't. The porch was clear of debris. The steps, though old, were solid. And strangest of all, James could swear he smelled wood smoke, faint but indistinguishable, as if someone had been here recently. He stepped out of the truck, and Ranger immediately began a perimeter check, moving with the purposeful efficiency of a working dog.
James watched him circle the cabin, nose to the ground, then stop at the front door. The dog sat, looked back at James, barked once, sharp, specific. "What is it, boy?" Ranger barked again, then did something James had never seen him do. The dog rose on his hind legs and pressed his front paws against the door in a specific pattern, left, right, center. The door clicked. It swung open slowly, revealing a dim interior that smelled of cedar and old paper and something else, something like the memory of pipe tobacco, Uncle Will's favorite blend. James's hand instinctively went to his hip, where he used to carry his sidearm, empty now, civilian life, but Ranger was already inside, and the dog's posture said safe, so James followed. The cabin was a single large room with a loft accessible by a ladder. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, shelves lined with books, a simple table and chairs, a bed in the corner, neatly made, and on the table, a letter with his name on it. James's hands shook slightly as he picked up the envelope, Uncle Will's handwriting. He sat down heavily in one of the chairs, and Ranger came to lean against his leg, offering comfort the way he'd done 100 times in the dark nights after the war. "Dear James, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've made it to Bitter Peak. Good. I knew you would, despite what the others said. They never understood you, never understood what you've seen, what you've carried. This cabin isn't what it appears to be. Neither is this land, and Ranger, well, he knows more than you think. His bloodline has been protecting this place for 3 generations. Look under the rug by the fireplace. Trust your partner. And James, trust yourself. You're not broken. You're exactly who you need to be for what comes next. With love and faith, Uncle Will." James stared at the letter for a long moment. Then he looked at Ranger. The dog was already at the fireplace, pawing at a worn rug. Together, they pulled it back. Beneath was a trap door. The cellar was cool and dry, lit by battery-powered lanterns that flickered to life when James descended the wooden stairs. Ranger led the way, moving with confidence as if he'd been here before, which was impossible, unless it wasn't. The space was larger than the cabin above, carved into the living rock of the mountain. Metal shelves held waterproof containers. A desk stood against one wall, covered in maps and documents protected by plastic sleeves. James opened the first container with trembling hands. Inside were journals, dozens of them, dating back decades. Uncle Will's neat handwriting filled page after page. James began to read, and with each entry, the truth unfolded like a map of hidden territory. The land wasn't worthless. It sat atop underground springs that fed into a network of mineral-rich aquifers. Water rights alone were worth millions. But more than that, the property held a designation from the Civil War era, protected federal land granted to veterans and their families, locked under heritage status that couldn't be broken by any commercial interest. Uncle Will had spent years researching, documenting, protecting it. But for what? The answer came in the last journal. This land is meant to be a sanctuary, a place for soldiers who've been broken by war to come and heal, where they can bring their service animals, their partners who've seen them through the darkness. The water here has properties, minerals that help with inflammation, with pain. The isolation offers peace. The cabin can be expanded, improved, but the core mission must remain sanctuary. I'm leaving it to you, James, because you understand what these men and women need. You've walked through that darkness. And Ranger, he's been trained by the same family who've bred and trained dogs for this land for 3 generations. He'll protect it. He'll protect you. But others will come, others who see only money, only exploitation. Robert is already asking questions, making phone calls to developers. Patricia has friends in the state legislature. They'll try to take this from you. Don't let them. James sat back, his mind reeling. A sanctuary for broken soldiers and their dogs. A place to heal.
He thought of the men he'd served with, the ones who came home to nothing, the ones who couldn't find their place in a world that didn't understand what they'd given, what they'd lost, the ones who had service dogs who were their only anchor to sanity. A place like this could save lives. Ranger's sudden growl brought him back to the present. The dogs stood at the base of the stairs, hackles raised, ears forward. Above them, James heard it, the sound of vehicles, multiple engines, doors slamming. Then Robert's voice, loud and entitled. "I know you're in there, James. We need to talk." James climbed the stairs quickly, Ranger at his heels. Through the cabin window, he could see 3 SUVs parked in the clearing. Robert and Patricia stood near the porch, but they weren't alone. 6 men in expensive outdoor gear flanked them, and James recognized the type immediately. Private security, maybe worse. His heart rate spiked. Ranger pressed against his leg, grounding him. "You're not back there," James whispered to himself. "You're here. Different fight, different rules." He opened the door and stepped onto the porch. "It's late, Robert. What do you want?" His cousin's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "We want to make this easy, James. You sign over the property to us, we give you a fair price, everyone walks away happy. You clearly can't maintain this place, and frankly, you're not in any condition to make important decisions. The property's not for sale." Patricia stepped forward, her heels sinking into the soft earth. "Don't be stupid, James. This land has value, but you need lawyers, connections, capital to realize it. You have none of those things. You have a dog and PTSD. Sign the papers." One of the security men moved slightly, his hand resting on something at his belt. James saw Ranger's body coil, ready. "I said no. This is my property. You're trespassing. Leave." Robert's face darkened. "You think you can stop us? You think anyone cares about a washed-up soldier and his mutt? We have lawyers, James. We have connections. We'll tie you up in court until you're bankrupt. Or," he gestured to the men around him, "or we can settle this now. You walk away, the cabin burns. Tragic accident. These old structures, so dangerous." The threat hung in the air like smoke. James felt the familiar tunnel vision starting, the combat awareness sharpening every detail. Rangers breathing, the wind in the pines, the positions of each hostile, exit routes, cover points. "Last chance," Robert said. "Sign or we make you." James stepped back into the cabin. "Ranger, inside." The door closed. He heard Robert signal the men forward. Then the night exploded into violence. The first man through the door met Ranger's teeth. The German Shepherd moved like lightning, trained and lethal, taking the attacker down before he could raise the crowbar in his hand. James grabbed the second man's arm, redirecting his momentum into the door frame. Years of combat training overrode the civilian hesitation. But there were too many. Something crashed through a window. Smoke began to fill the room. Tear gas. James's eyes burned. His throat closed. Through the chaos, he heard Patricia screaming, "Get him out! Get the dog!" Ranger was everywhere, a whirlwind of fur and fury, protecting, defending. But then he heard it, the sound that stopped his heart. Ranger's yelp of pain. The smoke cleared enough to see one of the men standing over Ranger with a cattle pod. The dog lay on his side, trembling. Something broke inside James, or maybe something that had been broken finally fused back together. He moved without thinking, without fear, with only purpose. The man with the cattle pod went down hard, then the next, then the next. The cabin itself seemed to fight with him, loose floorboards tripping attackers, a beam creaking and falling at exactly the right moment to block a doorway. But Robert had a gun now, a small pistol, shaking in his hand but pointed at James.
"Enough!" Robert shouted. "It's over. Sign the papers or I swear I'll—" Ranger, wounded and bleeding from a gash on his side, lunged from the floor. The gun went off, deafening in the enclosed space. James felt the bullet pass so close to his head he felt the heat. Then Henry Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. "Federal agents, everyone freeze!" Headlights flooded the cabin. Rangers, real rangers, federal law enforcement, poured into the clearing. Henry Morrison stood among them, no longer the frail elderly lawyer, but a man with steel in his spine. "Robert Caldwell, Patricia Caldwell, you're under arrest for attempted assault, arson, and conspiracy to defraud federal property protections. These agents have been monitoring your communications with Apex Development for 3 months. Robert's face went white. Patricia tried to run, but an agent caught her easily. James dropped to his knees beside Ranger. The dog's breathing was labored, blood matting his fur. "Stay with me, boy. Stay with me." Henry knelt beside them, his hand gentle on James's shoulder. "There's a veterinary hospital 20 minutes down the mountain. They're expecting you. William arranged everything, James. Everything." The hospital lights were too bright, too clean. James sat in the waiting room, his hands still shaking, dried blood, Ranger's blood on his shirt. Henry sat beside him, patient and quiet. "How did Uncle Will know?" James finally asked. William was a smart man. He saw Robert's greed years ago. He spent the last 5 years setting up protections, legal, federal, even international conservation designations. He had me monitoring Robert's communications. When we saw the connection to Apex Development, we knew they'd try something violent. William wanted you here because he knew you'd fight, not just for the land, but for what it represents. "A sanctuary," James whispered. "Yes, and Ranger, William worked with the breeder who trained his grandfather. That bloodline has protected this land for 3 generations. Ranger knew the cabin's defenses, knew how to open the door, where the safe rooms were. William left detailed instructions for his training. Is he going to make it?" Henry's smile was gentle. "The vet says yes. Dogs like Ranger, they're fighters, like the men they serve." 3 months later, James stood on the newly expanded porch of what was now officially registered as Valor Peak Sanctuary. The cabin had been carefully renovated, growing into a larger facility while maintaining its heart, the original structure where Uncle Will had dreamed this dream. Dog lay at his feet, a scar on his side that mirrored the scars James carried inside. The dog's tail thumped against the wood when a truck pulled into the clearing. An older man got out, moving stiffly, a service dog, a chocolate lab at his side. Purple heart cap, 1,000-yard stare that James recognized immediately. "Is this the sanctuary?" the man called out, his voice rough with disuse. James walked down to meet him, Ranger limping slightly but staying close. "It is. Welcome home, soldier." The man's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know where else to go. You're exactly where you need to be." More trucks arrived over the following weeks. Men and women who'd served, who'd sacrificed, who'd come home to a world that didn't understand their wounds. They came with their dogs, their partners, their 4-legged therapists and protectors. The sanctuary grew. Cabins built by volunteers, therapy spaces, walking trails through the forest where the only requirement was silence and peace.
The underground springs were developed into a natural therapy pool, the minerals helping with pain, with inflammation, with the physical manifestations of invisible wounds. James found his purpose here, in the faces of those who came seeking the same peace he'd found, in the dogs who reunited with their handlers, who helped their humans remember how to feel safe again. One evening, as the sun set over Bitter Peak, painting the mountains gold and crimson, James sat on the porch with Ranger's graying muzzle resting on his knee. "We did it, Uncle Will," he said to the wind. "We built what you dreamed." And somewhere in the whisper of the pines, he could almost hear his uncle's voice. "I always knew you would, son. I always knew." The cabin lights glowed warm against the gathering dark. Inside, veterans and their dogs gathered for dinner, for community, for healing. The laughter and quiet conversation drifted out into the Montana night, the sound of broken souls learning to be whole again. Ranger's tail thumped once, content. They were home. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. Every subscription helps us share more stories of loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bonds between heroes and their faithful companions. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. And if you know a veteran or anyone who needs to hear this message, that healing is possible, that purpose can be found again, please share this video. Together, we honor those who've served and the brave hearts who stand beside them. Thank you for being part of our community. Until next time, may you find your own Valor Peak, your place of peace, purpose, and belonging.